Thank you for downloading the Start the Week podcast from BBC Radio 4. For more information, go to bbc.co.uk/Radio 4. Hello, well, these are hard economic times for Britain, but the country is apparently still proud of its design and creativity. Indeed, a new survey exciting some newspapers today suggests that, partly thanks to that, Britain is a world leader in soft power. Well, if this country has been a hub for creative work, then art colleges are among the reason why. Unusually open, mildly anarchic gardens for young designers and artists. The Royal College of Art celebrates its 175th anniversary this week with an exhibition, and I'm joined by some famous alumni and teachers from the art college world: the sculptor Anthony Gormley, the designer Ron Arad, the design historian Sarah Teasley, and a former rector of the Royal College itself, Sir Christopher Frayling. Christopher, you wrote a history of the Royal College, and one of the things that fascinated me is the parallels between the official anxieties that led to this being founded way back in 1837 and what's going on today.
Yeah, there was a select committee looking at our manufactures and our exports and our balance of payments, rings a slight bell, and they looked at Lyon silk, at French silk and wallpaper, and then they went off to Prussia and Bavaria to look at industrial design, and they came back and said, what can we do to improve the quality of design for manufacture? They also said, why is there this snobbery about sort of applied subjects? Why are universities so snobbish about people who use their hands? And why are we sort of so good at luxury goods and not so good at mass manufacture goods? It rings a slight bell.
It rings so many bells.
And so they set up the Government School of Design, which is the origin of public sector art education in this country. And it was only within 2 years of any public sector education of any sort. So it was obviously a priority.
And to start with, it wasn't terribly successful. Indeed, I was delighted to see there was a student revolt almost immediately.
There was. It was one of the first sit-ins in the history of British higher education, 1845, because they wanted life drawing. In 1837, they knew what they didn't want. They didn't want to turn all these hapless students into artists, so they weren't allowed to do life drawing. They weren't allowed to compete with the Royal Academy. They had to sit there and copy geometric shapes and copy antique things, and if they were very, very grown up, they might even be allowed to do a drawing of their own, but probably not. And the students got upset, so by 1845, they had a sit-in saying, we want to do life drawing. Take the drape off the life model. We actually want a life model who's nude. Questions in the House, and fine art was introduced to public sector art education as a result of student agitation.
And then later on, the Royal College moves to what's been called Albertopolis, the Albert Hall, Albert Monument sprawl of South Kensington, where it is still today.
Yeah, everyone talks about, the legacy of the Olympics, but talk about legacy. The legacy of the 1851 Great Exhibition. All those museums down at what became Exhibition Road, all those colleges, Royal College of Art, Royal College of Music, Imperial College of Science Technology, and now medicine, and etc., etc. And all of that is on the back of the profits of the Great Exhibition. So the Royal College moves to South Ken, and indeed the system of teaching design gets known as the South Kensington system all over the world. Absolutely.
And if we fast forward right to the current day, this is the Royal College is for graduates, it's for people studying MA, and it brings together people studying textile design, vehicle design, engineering, and some people who want, in the end, to be fine artists.
Yes, it's about 50-50 between the fine and applied arts and design. And the whole philosophy is really there's a two-way street between them, that you study art in a design environment and design in an art environment. Entirely postgraduate, average age of the students 23, 24, 25, and very specialised these days. In Victorian times you did design, which was basically drawing and copying things. Now, as you say, you do vehicle design, graphic design, fashion design, textile design. So it's all very specialised, very face-to-face. And one of the important things is that practitioners should teach you. Not career academics, but people who actually have one foot in the world of practice, and that's very important.
Moving just a little bit away from the RCA itself, I was fascinated sort of writing about British history in the 20th century. What a huge number of creative people, particularly in things like rock music and so on, had come out of British art colleges. The art college movement, beyond the Royal College and beyond London, has been hugely influential on the life of this country, hasn't it?
It has. And what I never understand is, there's so many column inches devoted to financial services all the time. Now, financial services contributes to GDP about 1% more than the creative industries, which employ 2 million people, whereas the financial services employ 1 million people. So in terms of contribution to the economy, generally, the creative industries actually have it over financial services in almost every way. And how many column inches are there about it? Very little. So you're quite right, there's huge impact, but people don't seem to be noticing.
Anthony Gormley was nodding there.
Yeah, I think that, that extraordinary burst of creativity of the 60s, in music particularly, couldn't have happened without art schools. I mean, if you think of kind of Brian Ferry, if you think of David Bowie, I mean, all of them came out of the liberal art college education where anarchy was the idiom.
There's almost not a famous band which isn't out of an art college, or some of whose members aren't out of an art college from that period, actually.
Absolutely, and I think that underlines the culture, that there was this sense that actually making a future doesn't come out of doing things well that have already been done, but trying new things, and that's what was really encouraged in art school.
Ron Arad, you actually were teaching at the Royal College. Can you just reflect a little bit on the tension, if there is a tension, between the old skills or the traditionalist skills of the fine arts students sitting there and engineering and design, and the danger of separating those things?
Yes, I found myself at the college. I didn't plan an academic career. I didn't want to teach at the college, but I was asked, and I said okay. And I
had to persuade you.
You were pulled along.
And I inherited a course that's called furniture, not even furniture design, which means teaching people how to dovetail and how to make wooden things. And there was the industrial design course that was about how to skin hairdryers, and at that time, and I said, okay, we'll do it. And then, to my surprise, everything I wanted to do, Christopher said, yes, okay. Why don't we join the two courses together? Which is the opposite of what you talked about before, which is specializing. I'm against specializing. I'm against creating a course that teaches one thing, or that it's about one trend or one sort of manifesto, one look. So, I mean, I copied the AA where I studied, which was a very pluralist place. You had lots of contradictory things side by side, and it was all about choice. We could never tell if Alvin Boyarsky, that was the chairman, was totally indifferent to everything or a real pluralist. So that's what I thought.
So, so the atmosphere, the balance of having discipline and actual teaching versus a sense of possibilities and people running from one discipline to another, crossing boundaries, is crucial.
Well, I didn't like the word boundaries. I didn't like all the discussions about breaking the boundaries, and because the more you talk about them, the more you enforce them. And there's a lot of talk about interdepartmental projects and things. It doesn't happen. The only time you see the other departments is when there's a fire alarm, and everyone finds themselves outside. You work here too.
That's a bit unfair, but anyway.
No, it is a bit unfair. But it's such it used to be.
But you created, Ron, with your design products course, a kind of mini college in a way within your. You've got furniture at one end of the spectrum, and lots of gestural, creative design at the other. So in a way, you created a little unit that was a microcosm of the whole college.
Yeah, I thought the most important thing in designing a course is choosing the teachers
who's going to be on it.
Yeah. Who's going to be, first of all, the teachers, and then we had to choose people from opposing directions. People, like people that are very close to what I do, people that are completely on the other side. That's one thing. The other thing is choosing the students, because this college is very much in demand and has a very good name, and it's very prestigious, and lots of people from foreign countries.
I definitely want to return to that point. I just want to bring,
on the issue of appointing professors. I mean, one of the tricks I thought was to bring in eminent practitioners and try and create a situation where they're protected from all the admin and desk work and committee work that submerges so many people in higher education. So, in comes Ron, and then you appoint some number twos who are the sort of engine room of the department, so Ron can spend his whole time teaching. And that's incredibly important for the culture of art schools and a community
very, very
of practitioners.
Rare. It has to be said that that's what's under threat in the way that
Sarah Teasley.
I was, in response both to Ron and Christopher and Anthony, to what you've just said as well, I think, one thing that comes out at the college when it's running well, and presumably at any art school, there's a sense that the tutors and the technicians and the students are in it together. I think we sometimes describe it as a laboratory where everyone is experimenting and thinking and challenging together in the same place. And so what you're saying about practitioners who are in the world of design and art working alongside the students, there's a bit of mentoring, but there's also a sense in which the students, everyone is a professional together.
But there has to be also that sense that actually you're agenda setting. You are actually at the wave, and that wave is being seen, as it were, by the whole world. And I think that sense of I think Ron is unique. I think that he created at the Royal College a complete mixture. I always used to say that design was there to make the life of the world easier, and art was there to make it more interesting and more difficult. And I think that Ron never accepted that dichotomy and always wanted to make designs that made it more interesting and more difficult.
I'd like to ask a little bit about the mood for the students, the atmosphere, because Sarah, you write, you've written one of the essays in the book looking at 175 years, part of the exhibition, and you use a very interesting word, besottedness, which you pick up from a rather peppery-looking former director of the RCA, Robin Darwin, after the war, who said that students come to us because they are truly besotted in their work.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for picking up on my favourite word in the essay. I was determined to get it in wherever I could. The former rector of the college, Robin Darwin, has a wonderful quote where he says, students come to the college because they're truly besotted. And then he goes on to say, but do you know what? This is actually a universal ideal. So in a way, they're both being selfish in pursuing their dreams, and they're doing something that's truly beyond them and contributing to society and the world. And I think it's a wonderful quote to describe the way that art schools work. You need to be besotted. We'd not be there if we weren't. It's not the financial sector. We're not brilliantly paid, but we're there because every day you go home, and if it's a good school, you go home saying, good heavens, my mind is completely exploding right now.
But going home is interesting, because the only student trouble I had when I was rector was a little demonstration, could we stay open after 11 o'clock at night, please? We want to stay in the studio. Complete obsession and commitment with the work, which I'd never encountered in the university sector.
Well, I went to the drawing school a little while ago, and there, relatively late in the evening, there was one dogged student refusing to leave because he was working so hard. Anthony Gormley, you went to various art colleges, not this one, as a student. That sense of besottedness, the sense of, you talked to quite a lot of people, that going to art school was the most exciting time of life of all. Did you find that, or were you disappointed?
Absolutely. No, I started at the Central, and I found that over-administered and actually rather boring. I just remember that very first course, the first term. We were locked into a room. There were two white gloves. If you had a glove, you could work. If you didn't, you had to watch. It was the most ghastly Skinnerist kind of behaviourist experiment. Anyway, I didn't last there, and then I went to Goldsmiths. And at Goldsmiths, there was this absolute understanding that everybody there was besotted, but anyway, absolutely compelled by an inner demon to keep going and keep exploring and keep actually articulating what they were exploring, either by showing it or by talking about it. And in fact, the whole thing was really driven by the students. There was an understanding that the major energy and the thing that the source from which you learnt most was the energy of your fellow students, and that was in a way the motivating factor. And I think what Ron has just said, that the most important thing is the constitution of the course, what the tutors can, as it were, provoke in the students, but then how you constitute in your interviewing process a kind of chemistry in every year. And I think that's then it's a self-motivating principle.
Christopher, for all those people listening who are thinking, well, that sounds a lot of fun. I'm sure it's very pleasant, but how can you possibly tabulate or enumerate the value of these places in hard times? You know, we need more engineers. We understand we need more people working with reinforced concrete to build us bridges and this and that. What do you say to them? Just remind people what the value of art colleges has brought this country.
In economic terms, the great debate since the 90s has been about the creative industries, this sector of the economy which is art, design, broadcasting, publishing, etc., right across the spectrum. And art schools have had, as we've heard, a crucial impact on the whole creative sector in the UK. It's something we're very good at. In fact, the Treasury has predicted that by 2017, about 50% of new jobs in the UK will be coming from the creative sector. Okay,
that seems almost incredible.
Not really. We're very, very good at it. The problem has been that people say, we'll write it, they'll print it. So we do all the ideas, we generate all the design ideas, and someone in China is going to do the manufacturing. Dyson
creates his designs for new cleaners, and they're made elsewhere because they have to be still.
Yeah, and that was a disaster in many ways, because it sort of it meant that design became this sort of abstracted thing that you do. You do all the think work in England, but the do work is somewhere else, and someone's got to try and bring those two elements of the equation together. But there's the creative sector is one aspect of it. There's the sideways step that students take. You know, they don't all end up as professional artists, that in advertising, in broadcasting, right across the spectrum, you get people who've learnt to art at art school, but they've also learnt through art various skills for life that art seems to be very, very good at instilling, and they take a sideways step and do other things.
Ron, say that art college is not about being good for the economy.
Absolutely.
I wasn't saying that. I was answering Andrew's point.
I was provoking that.
I used to scare Christopher when I said we take perfectly employable people 2 years and they're unemployable.
I know, he'd say that just as I was bringing a government minister around.
No, but I think
terrifying.
we mustn't get lost in this debate, because I think that a good liberal art student life is a instrument for thinking. I mean, allows you to think by doing in a way that no other education can. And I think that it also gives you the context, if there are very good theoretical courses that run by the side of the doing, a way of being circumspect about the kind of world that you're living in.
And yet you can't get away from the fact that around the world, Anthony Gormley's and Anish Kapoor's and Ron Arad's chairs and spectacles and bicycles are things by which Britain is now known, probably better known than any kind of cars or big companies, and that must have some effect on the way the country's perceived.
Well, it's your soft power point again. I mean, art schools have been key with that as well.
Whether soft power includes any kind of power, I don't know, but
yes, I think there has to be an outcome, but I don't like the idea. I don't like the idea that somehow you quantify the use of an art college by how many places in industry you're providing. It's absolutely not the point.
Sarah.
I mean, on that point, I think there is the question about how does art college justify itself to the rest of the world will never go away. That gives us a useful opportunity to continue. This is something that I argue in my essay. It gives us an opportunity to continue redefining ourselves, to continue advocating. And particularly now, when arts funding and humanities funding from the entire spectrum of not just higher education, but primary and on up, is in danger. When government funding to humanities teaching has been essentially cut, and teachers in primary schools, secondary schools are finding music, arts, drama outside the new EBAC that's being proposed. Because we've got these challenges and because we're being asked to justify ourselves, it gives us the chance to make noise.
Yeah, well, this is very interesting, because here we are talking about how wonderful art colleges are and how important they've been to Britain, just at the time when art and design has been specifically excluded from the new curriculum.
Yeah, more than that. It's, the Brown Review of Higher Education, which was the basis for the restructuring of the fees and all these other things, actually has a paragraph where it says there are certain priority subjects in the national interest which will get special treatment. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and a bit of Chinese language, and some healthcare. if only he'd mentioned design, that whole debate since the 1990s, I thought had been won, which was actually the importance of these creative subjects to the national interest. And I completely accept what Ron's saying. It's not the justification for art schools, but it's a very, very useful, pragmatic argument. Then the Russell Group of universities say they're no longer going to accept art and design GCSEs as a prerequisite for getting in. Then you get the baccalaureate saying we're not going to have the arts as part of the core. I really don't understand it. I thought the argument was won in the 90s. It's slipped incredibly in the last 5 years. And I went to a dinner, actually, and sat next to Lord Browne and said, why on earth did you not mention design in that famous paragraph about priority subjects? He said, what a good idea. What are we going to do about it? Well, I mean, the horse has bolted, I'm afraid, and it's very, very sad that those net gains that we all thought we'd made seem to have slipped. And economically, this is disastrous.
So as compared to 1837, we're not nearly as forward-looking.
Well, I think something that Britain is at a very interesting place. And once again, we know that Britain was the leader in industrialisation. Talking about the Industrial Revolution, Britain was there first. And since 1837, successive governments in Japan, in Korea, in China, and in the North America as well, have said, how do we improve our manufacturing and our exports through art and design? What we've now got in Britain, and I think it's probably the first anywhere in the world, is the flip. And it's what Andrew, you and Christopher were talking about earlier. Now we need to say, how do we bring the making side back as well and have something underneath the creative industries?
Anthony, you fabricate, you make, you have people working with you.
This is a real kind of subject of passion for me. I think it's absolutely essential that there is a continuity between design and making, and I try and make the majority of my work here. But I work with, for example, a foundry in Halifax, Yorkshire. Halifax in the 60s had 52 foundries. There are now 3. And actually, if we don't keep them going, we're really going to be screwed. And I think the fact is, I was very sad when Dyson decided that all of his production was going to go to Singapore, because it is the link up that Christopher was saying about, in a way, doing the drawing and then having the things made that needs a continuity, and that's the very thing that could reinforce our manufacturing.
Sorry, just bring in Ron Arrett here,
the other
because
side of it is lots of design students graduate, and they're very grateful to places like Italy that can employ them and use their talent, where there's very little going on here.
When it comes to some of your more commercial work, I mean, is that made here, or is that mostly made outside the UK?
It's greatly made in Italy, where they have an amazing tradition of artisans.
Craftsmanship
And artisans that we don't have here. Very sad to see that a lot of them are being replaced by CNC machines, but that's the way it goes, and we enjoy that as well. Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff is not made here.
And when you're working here, you keep your team pretty tight, I think, in terms of the number of people working with you, the number of designers working with you. Do they then go off, some of them, and create practices of their own? Is there a sort of seeding of...
Don't give them ideas.
But Ron, I mean, to get back to this, Italy does it better than us, and they've got, as it were, the tooling to do it. Why can't that be true of Britain?
I don't know. It can be, but why it doesn't happen, I don't know. But in Italy, it does happen,
Lots of small companies working together over generations who've stuck with it may be part of the answer.
I can give you one other thing that would help manufacturing come back. This is actually precisely what I'm researching at the moment, is how can small and medium-scale manufacturing, especially in further flung regions, be brought back, and how can it be regenerated? And I've spent a lot of time talking to SMEs, talking to people on the shop floor. And one of the things that comes up repeatedly that we're not doing in this country, and I say we because I am in art and design education here, is really pushing regional innovation through research and through connections between research institutes and regions and manufacturers. Some universities are doing a fabulous job, but the one thing that comes up over and over again when I'm talking to SMEs is the fact that they've got researchers, including designers, outside who've not got to think about short-term profits, with whom they're able to share ideas and with whom they're able to develop.
Well, I certainly, in building the Angel of the North, this was a totally linked-up project between the parametrics department, the engineering department, the newly founded virtual development department of Sunderland University, and with all of those working together, we got back the shipbuilders that could make the bow bulges to make its bum and make its head. You know, how do you turn 6.5 millimetre ship plate into a compound curve? Well, you do it by spraying it with ice cold water and at the same time heating it with an oxyacetylene flame. It's like playing a violin. It's a skill. But we found those skills back, and what did we do? We ended up making this thing that in some way was both an extreme, act of confidence in this community's future. It was a way of... We couldn't have designed it without...
But also possibly a
new
farewell
technology
flourish
too.
as well to a lot of the fabrication of that part of the world.
Yes, I know. Well, I think that what's happened with the Swan Hunters is that those skills have had to find new outlets, but they're still there. And my with a new idea of what to do with them, they can flourish. And that's my point, that we don't have to say we can export it all that industry elsewhere.
Christopher Freeling.
And others have certainly got this message. I gave a lecture a couple of years ago in Hong Kong about art schools in Britain and what they contribute. And I asked the Design Council how many design colleges there were in mainland China. And they said they thought 800, either growing out of engineering colleges or freestanding. So I said in the lecture, I gather there are 800, statistics are really difficult with China. I gather there are 800 design colleges. Someone said, excuse me, sir, 1,200. 1,200 design colleges in mainland China linked with small, artisanal, making and with manufacturing. They've certainly got the message. The message they hadn't got, we had a fascinating discussion. They said, well, what sort of students do you get? And I said, well, they're bloody-minded, they're bolshy, they're angry, they love pushing the envelope. That's where you get an avant-garde from. That's where ideas come from. It's sort of Ron's point. Not in China. We don't do that. We stand on the shoulders of the master. And so that's interesting, whether a sort of Confucian philosophy of education is possible in an art school. But they've certainly got the message. And the other message they've got, which I think relates to manufacturing, is how do you link art schools with science? Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, if you take the Royal College, up the road is Imperial College. And Robert Winston, with whom I'm often confused, once said...
the moustache.
Thank you very much. And the voice slightly. For every idea that comes out of a lab in Imperial College... that could be partnered with a young designer at the Royal College a few yards away to turn it into a desirable product. That's not quite happening. The science world and the art school world, that's very important to all our futures, I think.
Ron Arad.
Yeah, a good example for what you're saying is, I don't know if you remember Jorge Lopez.
Yes, yeah.
Who...
You better explain.
He's a Brazilian student. He did a PhD in the course, and he researched making. He researched model making. He ended up developing a way to do 3D prints of embryos through ultrasound. And he's sort of he's an art student, and he invented an amazing medical tool.
But, I mean, the Royal College's designers come up with things like new forms of ambulance and hospital beds and all sorts of absolutely day-to-day gritty kinds of design, don't they, Sarah?
Indeed. I think, and this is a point that thinking about where should art schools in general be going, students, it's partly about this sort of mad bullshiness, but I think it's about this collision of mad bullshiness and I'm going to challenge what you say and I'm going to challenge you as well, with a pragmatic engagement with communities. And that may be the elderly. At the Royal College, we have the Helen Hamlin Centre, which is pretty much, I would say, Christopher, the world leader in research designed for ageing. And we have an intake of young student researchers or postgraduate researchers every year. And some of the projects that come out are, for example, redesigning the NHS ambulance. Something I'd mention, though, about design and science, I'd like to bring Fight Art in as well. And Ron, you have just now, and mention that we are starting to also see the students clamouring for more work with science, particularly because areas like nanotech, like biology, are starting to look increasingly like design, especially when you get into something like synthetic biology.
Sorry, I'd like to bring in Anthony Gourmet just here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, the thing now is to say we have We have this extraordinary history of manufacturing. We have to now link it, I think, with the new technologies that allow us to design, we use Rhino, for instance, in the studio the whole time. Rhino is a software program that allows you
relieved. I thought that's very,
Rhino
very
is a drug, you thought.
Endangered species.
Exactly.
No, it's a thing that allows you to design in 3 dimensions. Linking that skill then with a sand casting operation in Hexham, for example, we're able to do things that they would never have dreamed of doing, but we can do them in a way that uses very, very ancient techniques. And I think that's what good art colleges do. They make links.
About delight that art can give people. Delight and culture is anyway surplus to requirement. When we are hungry, we eat whatever we can. When we are not hungry, we start putting spices in it, and we enjoy it. And I think it's very easy to get.
Yes, nobody bought your Rover chair because they needed a chair. They bought it because it made them laugh. It was comfortable. It was amusing. It was beautiful.
It's all of the above.
She said firmly.
Yeah.
But
Christopher,
you mentioned the Helen Hamlin Centre. That was very interesting because I think the art school of the future does need to change its mindset a bit. With that one, we wanted to set up, I think it's one of the most important things I did actually, we wanted to set up a centre for design for an ageing population. Right? The demographics changing and, Twiggy appears on M&S posters, and et cetera, et cetera. And the mindset of most of the students were, it's really naff to design for older people. I want to design for my peer group. I understand what a 23-year-old, what's in the ether for a 23-year-old, and I want to design for youth. And there was a huge youth orientation towards most for graphics, fashion, textiles, etc. And we had to get them off that and say, it's actually okay to design for granny. Because actually, Granny is in the post-mortgage, post-children generation who's got lots of money, and demographically, they're going to be the consumers of the future.
Some of them do, and some of them don't,
moved
but yeah.
round. Yeah, but
Yeah.
slowly it moved round to designing for an ageing population, and I think that's one mindset that has to change. I think within art
Sarah.
schools.
I wanted to ask Christopher a bit about industrial partnerships within Helen Hamlin, partly to shift the conversation to talk about what industry might be doing. We've been talking about what art schools need to do. We've talked a bit about government. One of the things that we talk about in the college particularly is working with industry, collaborations that let students learn, but also let students give something to the economy, to say something that Ron is not going to like. And I also know, we also know that it's relatively easy for a school like the Royal College or Central St. Martin's that are in London to get very interesting corporate sort of partnerships.
Yeah.
But I was talking with someone recently but said, hang on, shouldn't all art schools be doing that? Shouldn't they all have the chance? And we know that funding in most areas comes to the capital, not to regions.
Well, I think your point about regional development comes in there. There are certain industry. Actually, going back to Victorian times, art schools used to specialise in the form of design that related most to local industry. So all the art schools in Stoke related to ceramics. All the art schools around Northampton designed shoes. And actually, maybe there's a lesson there about, not having a diffuse attitude towards industrial partnership, but actually relating it to the strengths of the locality. It relates to what Anthony was saying. And so I don't think it's sort of unfair and crack of the whip and all those sort of arguments, but it relates to regenerating regional industry.
I am going to pick up on what Ron was saying. What about delight? I think it is very, very dangerous if we start instrumentalising everything. I think it's very, very important to realise that imaginative furniture is as important as furniture. And indeed, how we value the change in our environment that something that has no function whatsoever does to people's minds and spirits.
What you do also is you bring me on to your new work, because I wanted to talk about that at White Cube, which is the biggest piece you've made.
It's the biggest body. It's the first body that I've made that you can actually get inside. You have to
Walk
go
through.
You have to go through its left foot, and there's only really room for one person at a time. But the show is called Model, and I wanted to really think about what that meant. I think there's a sense in which the model is an ideal. You're aspiring to an ideal, but it's also in a way about a proposition, about a possible. And so
It is still your body.
It doesn't really matter whose body it is. For most of these works, I was in the position that they are too, but they've been so evolved. I mean, basically, it's using the language of architecture, which is normally what shelters the body, to describe its inner state or attempt to model its inner state. And the big work, which is 100 tons of Corten steel, is 24 interconnecting chambers that make this reclining body that have more or less light. And you have to modify your body as you go through it, because there are chambers that are very small and quite low, and others that are extremely high. There are only 3 that allow light in, and I think this is about, in a sense, experiencing the darkness of the body, which is, I think, the place that we all live and most of us spend most of our lives escaping from, as a personal narrative. And this is the opposite of I suppose, sculpture as the making of an object. It's sculpture as the making of a place.
Because you're going to be drawing people inside the sculpture, then, as you say, relatively few are going to be able to be there at any one time. So, in a sense, it's the opposite of the public artwork sitting there surrounded by crowds of people.
Well, I'm quite interested, Andrew, as to... I've said that there are going to be no rules to this. There is room for, I think, about 380 people inside this body, but when it's full, it's going to be a very different sculpture. When it's empty, as you walk through it, it's incredibly acoustically alive. It booms as you walk, and it's rather scary. And actually, they were wondering about what the justified form of invigilation should be, and what the what the fire escape.
What happens when somebody panics inside?
And what
it.
happens when somebody gets stuck in the left hand, which is actually only about 80 centimetres high and about 4.5 metres long, and very, very black. And maybe somebody will go into the head, which is a complete light-locked black space, and can't find their way out. But all of these things are to be discovered. So this is a labyrinth of experience.
Yes, generalising from that, Ruskin gave a wonderful lecture called The Two Paths in the 1870s, where he talked about the roots of art education being the head, the heart and the hand. And that, you see, it's a good link, isn't it? What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, very good.
And that, the head period is all the think work that the Victorians did, and they certainly did a lot of thinking about design. The hand thing is about craft, and the heart is having your finger on the pulse of contemporary culture, but also personal expression. And Ruskin argued the best kind of art education brings those three things together: the head, the heart, and the hand. Thus, we bring out the whole person. And I think, there've been moments in the history of art education where one or other of those things has been overbalanced. Too much head work in Victorian times, too much handwork in the arts and crafts period, and the heart really letting rip in all sorts of ways since the 1950s. A balance between those three concepts is, I think, the future of art education.
And how does that relate, Ron Arad, when you're thinking about a piece, when you're drawing a piece, and you don't know whether this is going to be a piece for mass consumption, it's going to be made and sold in shops, or whether it's going to be...
You do know.
You do know, right from the beginning. You said this is going to be a one-off art piece.
I mean, it's not one or the other. It's sometimes this and sometimes that. When you design for the industry, you have different things to consider, like the cost of production, the technology, the commercial side of it. Nothing wrong with that. And when you design a medical equipment, you have to know how it's going to be used in the best possible way. I mean, you do something that's for...
Spectacles. Let's talk about spectacles, because that's a very interesting one.
Right. Spectacles.
So you approach spectacles and you ask some very, very basic questions about spectacles.
You look at it, first of all, for me to design is to do something that did not exist before I designed it. And you look at spectacles and everything is done, and the whole industry is based on retro. What new can we do? And you look and say, why don't we do something that it's easy to change the distance between the lenses, because we all have different noses, different distance between the eyes. Easy. Why wasn't it done before? Another thing is, if you go to a place where they make spectacles, it's like it's made by slaves, basically. People that put white gowns every morning and just deal with little fiddly screws. Why not make using selective laser sintering, which is a form of printing objects. Why not free the slaves and do spectacles that are one piece, no parts, and we can do it with the geometry, with the materials, and it's not to be shown in an art gallery. It's to be worn.
Stuck on your nose.
Yeah. It's not to say that we can't use the same knowledge, the same technology, the same sort of skills to create delight in different circumstances.
So we come to the oddness, Sarah, again, of colleges. So that lateral thinking is a stale phrase, but fresh thinking, the ability to think sideways and freshly, is what you want out of art colleges. And yet the notion of a college, the pedagogic notion of a college, and that seems to be in contradiction to that.
I would beg to disagree on that one. In fact, I wouldn't beg to disagree. I will just disagree.
Disagree away.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things, when I was writing my essay for the our commemorative book, I spoke with a number of colleagues, and one thing that came up over again was that we're not in the business of preparing students for industry. We're preparing them to create the future. We don't want them to fit into what's already there. And I have a great quote from a colleague who says, "We're not trying to usurp the mold, rather we're simply not considering it." So I think, you're right, there is a tension, but it's that sort of magical tension of pushing forwards and complete rigor and challenge, and why are you doing that, that makes the school.
Yeah, I agree about the tension, although it is a dynamic form of tension. David Hockney, when he graduated from the Royal College in 1962, did a sort of bootleg version of his diploma. He stormed the printing presses and printed his own diploma, and on it he had a student being supported by the then rector, Robin Darwin, who you mentioned, bumping his head on the Royal Coat of Arms. And I've spoken to him about it, and basically that, he reckons, is the whole tension of a place like the Royal College. Yes, there's the establishment bit, the Lion and Unicorn, the Royal Coat of Arms, Royal, degrees, all that paraphernalia. But you bump your head on it. That's the point. That tension is what defines the college. For him, art education, the cardinal sin in art education is not having a strong point of view. If you agree with everything and the system is like sponge and goes in all the time, then you get nowhere. What you want is a collision between generations, and that's how you find your own voice.
Final thought from Anthony Gormley.
My feeling is that art schools are the things that reinforce agency in the world. A good art student thinks that he doesn't have to fit into an already existing world. He makes his own, and that's what they're for.
What a wonderful way to end what's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks to all of you, the designer and architect Ron Arad, Sir Christopher Frayling, whose latest book was on craftsmanship, published last year, but he's also co-curated the current Hollywood costume show, which is wowing them at the V&A. Sarah Teasley, whose essay is included in the book A Perfect Place to Grow, 175 years at the RCA, and which accompanies an exhibition of the same name at the Royal College of Art. And Anthony Gormley, whose latest solo exhibition, Model, we were just talking about, will be showing at the White Cube Gallery in Bermondsey in London from next Wednesday. Next week, we're going to be talking about Germany in Europe with Katinka Barish, Gisela Stewart, Douglas Carswell and Karen Leader. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
There are many more Radio 4 arts and discussion programmes to download for free. Find these on the website at bbc.co.uk/Radio4.
And our balance of payments, rings a slight bell. And they looked at Lyon silk, at French silk and wallpaper, and then they went off to Prussia and Bavaria to look at industrial design, and they came back and said, what can we do to improve the quality of design for manufacture? They also said, why is there this snobbery about sort of applied subjects? Why are universities so snobbish about people who use their hands? And why are we sort of so good at luxury goods and not so good at mass manufacture goods? It rings a slight bell.
It rings so many bells.
And so they set up the Government School of Design, which is the origin of public sector art education in this country. And it was only within 2 years of any public sector education of any sort. So it was obviously a priority.
And to start with, it wasn't terribly successful. Indeed, I was delighted to see there was a student revolt almost immediately.
There was. It was one of the first sit-ins in the history of British higher education, 1845, because they wanted life drawing. In 1837, they knew what they didn't want. They didn't want to turn all these hapless students into artists, so they weren't allowed to do life drawing. They weren't allowed to compete with the Royal Academy. They had to sit there and copy geometric shapes and copy antique things, and if they were very, very grown up, they might even be allowed to do a drawing of their own, but probably not. About 50-50. between the fine and applied arts and design. And the whole philosophy is really there's a two-way street between them, that you study art in a design environment and design in an art environment. Entirely postgraduate, average age of the students 23, 24, 25, and very specialised these days. In Victorian times you did design, which was basically drawing and copying things. Now, as you say, you do vehicle design, graphic design, fashion design, textile design. So it's all very specialised, very face-to-face. And one of the important things is that practitioners should teach you. Not career academics, but people who actually have one foot in the world of practice. And that's very important.
Moving just a little bit away from the RTA itself, I was fascinated sort of writing about British history in the 20th century. What a huge number of creative people, particularly in things like rock music and so on, had come out of British art colleges. The art college movement, beyond the Royal College and beyond London, has been hugely influential on the life of this country, hasn't it?
It has. And what I never understand is, there's so many column inches devoted to financial services all the time. Now, financial services contributes to GDP about 1% more than the creative industries, which employ 2 million people, whereas the financial services employ 1 million people. So in terms of contribution to the economy, generally, the creative industries actually have it over financial services in almost every way. And how many column inches are there about it? Very little. So you're quite right, there's huge impact, but people don't seem to be noticing.
Anthony Gormley was nodding there.
Yeah, I think that, that extraordinary burst of creativity of the 60s, in music particularly, couldn't have happened without art schools. I mean, if you think of kind of Brian Ferry, if you think of David Bowie, I mean, all of them came out of the liberal art college education where anarchy was the idiom.
There's almost not a famous band which isn't out of an art college, or some of whose members aren't out of an art college from that period, actually.
Absolutely, and I think that underlines the culture, that there was this sense that actually making a future doesn't come out of doing things well that have already been done, but trying new things, and that's what was really encouraged in art school.
Ron Arad, you actually were teaching at the Royal College. Can you just reflect a little bit on the tension, if there is a tension?
And the students got upset, so by 1845 they had a sit-in saying, we want to do life drawing. Take the drape off the life model. We actually want a life model who's nude. Questions in the House, and fine art was introduced to public sector art education as a result of student agitation.
And then later on, the Royal College moves to what's been called Albertopolis, the Albert Hall, Albert Monument sprawl of South Kensington, where it is still today.
Yeah, everyone talks about, the legacy of the Olympics, but talk about legacy. The legacy of the 1851 Great Exhibition. All those museums down at what became Exhibition Road, all those colleges, Royal College of Art, Royal College of Music, Imperial College of Science Technology, and now Medicine, and etc., etc. And all of that is on the back of the profits of the Great Exhibition. So the Royal College moves to South Ken, and indeed the system of teaching design gets known as the South Kensington system all over the world. Absolutely.
And if we fast forward right to the current day, this is the Royal College is for graduates, it's for people studying MA, and it brings together people studying textile design, vehicle design, engineering, and some people who want, in the end, to be fine artists.
Yes, it's about...
Thank you for downloading the Start the Week podcast from BBC Radio 4. For more information, go to bbc.co.uk/Radio 4. Hello, well, these are hard economic times for Britain, but the country is apparently still proud of its design and creativity. Indeed, a new survey exciting some newspapers today suggests that, partly thanks to that, Britain is a world leader in soft power. Well, if this country has been a hub for creative work, then art colleges are among the reason why. Unusually open, mildly anarchic gardens for young designers and artists. The Royal College of Art celebrates its 175th anniversary this week with an exhibition, and I'm joined by some famous alumni and teachers from the art college world: the sculptor Anthony Gormley, the designer Ron Arad, the design historian Sarah Teasley, and a former rector of the Royal College itself, Sir Christopher Frayling. Christopher, you wrote a history of the Royal College, and one of the things that fascinated me is the parallels between the official anxieties that led to this being founded way back in 1837 and what's going on today.
Yeah, there was a select committee looking at our manufactures and our exports